think it can. Oh, it comes with a bookmark too.
That's. So are you. That's awesome.
Well, my goal was
This is Fem Energies.
Okay, okay.
That's the catch.
I'll still do that.
You don't have to. No problem.
To Matthew.
The extra labor, I suppose.
M-A-T-T-A-T-W, right?
You want to scoot it toward?
One T or an E at the end? Okay.
That's truly an Achilles heel. It's like my one flaw. I can never spell my name correctly.
It's
I'm glad that they put our names
first
on
one
the
or the
back,
last
so
one?
in case we forget.
oh.
For everyone else too.
True.
Man, I was on a panel yesterday and I dropped so many F-bombs and then I like
Nice.
Oh, that
It-
is helpful.
no. But I just like this was it was in my excerpt. It wasn't just like
It says be aware, and that says please don't cuss. Like, there's a
Yeah,
difference. I'm
that's all.
aware.
Yeah. I wasn't just like I started doing the reading and I was like, oh, I didn't reread this excerpt before doing this.
Yeah, I think we're okay. There's one over there. Spoke too soon.
Your book stands up on its own.
Yeah, I will. So, let's see how long that lasts. If not, I think I may cause a
No,
scene.
you're smart. Yeah, it's thick enough so that it jolts.
Yeah.
That was the plan all along.
That's
right?
the secret. Just overwork yourself. Don't do that. That's not true.
No. Don't just get thick page stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. That's
Yeah, the cheap fibrous paper stock.
yeah.
That's the way to go.
That's the
Newsprint,
best.
everybody. Newsprint.
That's when you know you've made it. When they start printing the books on the
Hi, everybody. I think we're ready to get started. If I'm wrong, someone tell me. But so, thank you all for coming. I hope you're having a good con so far. So my name is Matthew Yanow. I am the past president of ALA's Graphic Novels and Comics Roundtable, and I'll be moderating and trying to let these people speak as much as humanly possible. But first, I just want to do some quick introductions. So, my things are out of order here. But so as I read your name, just wave to people. So Hope Larson is the author and illustrator of many graphic novels for children, including the Eisner Award nominated All Summer Long, the author of Eisner Award nominated Salt Magic, and the illustrator of the Eisner Award winning and New York Times best-selling A Wrinkle in Time, the graphic novel. She lives in Asheville, North Carolina. Rebecca Mock is an illustrator, animator, comic book artist, educator, and writer. Their previous books include Compass South, which was a New York Times bestseller, and Knife's Edge, also collaborations with Hope Larson. They have made artwork for many newspapers, cartoons, books, commercials, and video games. They live and work in Brooklyn, New York. Sophie Yanow is the artist and writer behind The Contradictions, out now from Drawn and Quarterly, winner of the 2019 Eisner for Best Webcomic. Her work has been nominated for the Lambda Literary Award for LGBTQ Comics, the Ringo, Harvey, and Ignatz Awards, and it has been longlisted for the Believer Book Award. Her translation of Dominique Goblet's Pretending is Lying received the Scott Monstriff Prize. She has been published by The New Yorker, The Guardian, The Nib, and The Paris Review, and she was a MacDowell Colony Fellow. Jerry Kraft is a New York Times best-selling author-illustrator who has worked on numerous picture books, graphic novels, and middle-grade novels, including the award-winning graphic novel New Kid. Jerry is the creator of Mom's Boys, an award-winning syndicated comic strip. He has won 5 African American Literary Awards and is a co-founder of the Schomburg Center's annual Black Comic Book Festival. He received his BFA from the School of Visual Arts and now lives in Connecticut. Visit him online at jerrycraft.com. And Jose Pimienta was raised in Mexicali, Baja California, and now resides in Los Angeles, California, where they work on comics and storyboards for animation and film. Suncatcher was their debut author-illustrator graphic novel. Twin Cities is their first middle-grade graphic novel. In their stories, they focus on the importance of Latinx culture and the experience of growing up on the border. Follow them on Twitter at Joepi, Joepi. So thank you all for being here today. Can we have a quick clap for them, because they're awesome? So just, I always try to open with this question, so we can just start with Jerry and go down the line, and just give us a pitch about this book sitting in front of you right now. What is your most recent work about?
Okay, so this book is Class Act, which is the companion book to the first graphic novel that I did for HarperCollins called New Kid. New Kid is the story loosely based on my life and my two sons of being one of the few kids of color in a predominantly wealthy private school. And so in New Kid, you met Jordan Banks and then his new friend Drew and Liam, are kind of like the Three Musketeers. And then in this book, the follow-up is the 8th grade year, and it focuses a little bit more on Drew and his friend Liam as well.
So Twin Cities is the story of these twins who grow up in Mexicali, but when they graduate from 6th grade, one decides that she wants to study in the neighboring city in California called Calexico and receive an American education, whereas in her twin Fernando decides to stay in Mexico and continue his education on the Mexican side. And that starts bringing about like the difference between going to different schools and also befriending different people, and it just goes from there.
Yeah, The Contradictions it's autofiction. It's sort of a college-age, coming-of-age story about a character also named Sophie, who studies abroad in Paris and is trying to learn how to be a good person through hitchhiking across Europe and shoplifting. All right, I'm going to attempt this. I'm going to try this pitch. It's been a little while since we did it.
Yeah.
So Salt Magic is kind of like a mix of Spirited Away and Little House on the Prairie. It's set in 1919, and it's about 12-year-old Bonseal who has to go on a quest to save her family's farm and confronts two different witches. Anything you want to add to that?
You hit the nail on the head. It is a magical journey story.
Great. Well, there we go. I think it's back on now. Thank you all. So, the theme of our panel here is talking about this combination where, comics can provide entertainment, but also opportunities to engage with difficult topics and to encourage empathy with readers. So I'm just wondering, did you have this idea in mind when you were creating these stories that maybe the readers are gonna, learn something along the way? Let's start at the other end this time. Oh, thanks. So Hope, that would be you.
Starting with me. Learn something.
Yeah, when you started the book, I mean, was that your goal at all, to teach anybody anything?
I have to say, for this book, it was not. My goal was to write an entertaining story, an adventure story, and to tackle some themes that I was thinking about. It's the theme of this book is really like, who do I want to be when I grow up as an adult? Like, what kind of person do I want to be?
Yeah.
Do I want to follow the sort of life that gender norms and society has set out for me, or do I want to veer away from that?
Yeah, to have control over it.
Yeah.
I think, I mean, I didn't write the story, but
Well, you co-authored it.
I thought a lot about that theme, definitely, and I tried to imbue it. But there's a theme in the story, rather than educational. It's definitely about connecting with a feeling, with a frustration at a particular time. I think in a child's development of grappling with having absolutely no control over your future, and through magic and through fantasy, Bonseal takes control of her life, which I think is a beautiful theme for a story rather than a lesson. Yeah.
Yeah, with The Contradictions, I was I was exploring ideas from my own life, but I think the thing that came out of it was very related to empathy, which is oop, that I think it's sort of about having self-compassion, specifically when you're really, like at that age, I was really trying to figure out, like, okay, how do I live correctly? Like, how do I survive under capitalism? And like, how do I be completely pure? And there was just so much like beating myself up over not doing things right. And yeah, so I think that eventually it kind of came to be about like figuring out how to survive and have self-compassion for, how we're all living.
Should get closer. With Twin Cities, I think it's one of the things that I definitely had in mind was just because by the nature of the location, where living in a border town, there's just like so much culture clash between Americanisms and traditional Mexican traditional Mexican traditions. So I think that one of the things that I wanted to do was just explore different points of view from multiple people, specifically kids that are in this middle grade area. So I think I was just more interested in trying to learn as well as trying to find like what those differences can be, which is why you have some characters who are they have specific points of view. So yeah, I definitely wanted to explore that and just see how how it all relates specifically to the location that they're in. So yeah, I think I had that in mind throughout the whole process. I think that's
Yeah, with me there was just so much that I wanted to teach and share because I just never saw. I wasn't a reader as a kid, and I never saw myself in a way that was kind of, how me and my friends lived. A lot of the books that featured African American characters were historic, which I couldn't necessarily relate to, or they were about struggle. And, me and my friends grew up playing stickball and riding skateboards and, laughing and, I had a mom and a dad, and how often do you see that portrayed when you talk about African American kids? It's always about its history or its misery. And so I just wanted to really show that, kids, how I grew up, or my sons, sometimes the hardest decision is whether you want to play Xbox or PlayStation. If you want to have, it doesn't always have to be like every time you leave the house, you're fearing for your life. And so with this, I wanted to do race and class, but not anything catastrophic that happened, because I always say that when I'm reading a book that have African American protagonists, it's like watching a toddler run. Like, at some point something bad is going to happen. You look at it, it's like, oh, that's so cute, but it's like, stop, baby, stop running, you're going to fall. And to this day, I'm still very nervous. Like, any character that I gravitate to and I associate with, I just always think that something bad is going to happen. And I just wanted to have a story where that didn't happen. So it's more about little things that happen as opposed to one, like, catastrophic event.
These things are very mobile. Yeah, so that that raises a question I had. So all of your books, all stories have this arc of conflict and resolution and everything, but there's a lot of little conflicts in these books, and balancing this portrayal of struggle and anxiety is really, as I was reading all of them, anxiety was the thread that I felt through every book. Anxiety about, maybe that's just me reading my own self into the story right now. But so can you all talk a little bit about how maybe you balanced out that, like, wanting to show, kids being kids, or tell this fantastical Western fairy tale story with this very real sense of anxiety in the world, and my skateboard fell over. But Jerry, let's start with you and go back down.
Yeah, the anxiety is a big part of, especially middle school. So I think that anybody relates to that. And but like Jordan Banks, who's the protagonist in New Kid, I was the smallest and the youngest kid in my class, and as an African American, I was light-skinned with straight hair, so I looked like the white kid around black kids, and then I was the black kid around white kids. So when I picked all the little parts of that, I was like, wow, there really is a lot in there, you know. But again, I wanted to balance it with humor, you know, and a mom and a dad and a loving support group. So I wanted to have as much as I could without it being seen as a depressing story. So hopefully you see the humor first, you know, and then you see all those other things. So my goal was to have it, once you read this, like, oh, yeah, you know, and then you think about it, you know, after a while, and think of all the things that you saw, as opposed to just like, boom, 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 boom. Like, I don't want you being nervous.
Yeah.
There's a couple of little scenes, especially in class act, but nothing that was just too overwhelming.
Yeah, I mean, it's, there's an academic principle that I'm forgetting the name of, but it basically says that the tension is so high because the stakes are so low. And there's something about that that I really take to consideration when trying to give the character some form of, like, some kind of friction or some kind of combativeness or just something to, like, you know, to have on their everyday, because that way it can kind of, you can kind of turn a mundane scene into something either relevant or significant, such as what channel are you watching, or what favorite snack is the best one, and that can also be a projection, or that can be like, that can be like a window into something bigger, such as, well, what movies are better, the ones here or the ones over there, kind of a thing. And if it starts building up that way, then that's a really good way of, like, building some kind of tension and setting characters in opposite sides for bigger things to come. So,
What snack is the best one?
I'm not answering that question in public. Like, it's like, we're being recorded,
see,
sir.
Now that's the tension.
You have to read the book.
Chocolate
There
chip
you go.
cookies, right? Like, that's where we're all at.
Yeah, I think, at least in my work, anxiety is very easy to come by because the protagonist is based on myself. But there's like I think a sort of I have a self-awareness, the character has a self-awareness about that, and a lot of the tension comes from finding someone who doesn't have that anxiety, and like the tension between those two characters, and as they're sort of going on this journey together. And yeah, so I think that it just becomes an engine for creating tension pretty in life and in fiction.
True. Very true. For our book, at least as far as my approach, I thought it was interesting that you mentioned that you might have been projecting your own anxieties as you were reading them, which I think is something intrinsic about comics in general, that they can be windows or doors into your own feelings and your sense of self, the way that prose can't be. And I think part of that is the way you can see a character's expressions and how that might conflict with what they're saying, and how you can understand more than one level of what's happening at once, because so much can go on in an image. And the way we learn to process images is to process it all at once rather than just like one fact after the other. So with our working style, especially with how Hope writes, is a lot of panels will have layers. A lot of pages will have layers of things happening. So Von Seal is anxious about her family, but she's anxious about the bigger world, the drought that's affecting her entire town. And she's anxious about the magic curse that has been put on her family's farm. And I think at a lot of points in the book, you're not sure how much of it is her own fantasy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like a big part of the story, or a big part of the subtext in the story, is that Von Seal's older brother has gone away to fight in World War I and come back a very changed person. They were very, very close, and he's come back and he's immediately gotten married to his childhood, childhood sweetheart. Mm-hmm. And there's suddenly this big wedge between Von Seal and her brother that she's struggling against. As far as like actually, it's so interesting that you said that there's a lot of anxiety in this book, because I'm like, is there? Because
I remember something you actually said about this, is that Von Seal's struggle as a 12-year-old is sort of born from your experiences as an adult.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm a very anxious person. Did I like just imbue this book with tons of anxiety? Because like I wrote it at a time when I wrote it in my mid-30s when I was sort of like grappling with the same questions that Von Thiel is grappling with, like how is the rest of my life going to play out? I was divorced. I had a relationship that had just sort of fallen apart, and I was like, am I gonna have a family? Am I just gonna really just sock it in with work and that's gonna be my identity? So I was dealing with a lot of the same questions about who do I want to become as Von Thiel is. So, I mean, it's very anxious stuff it was for me.
Very heavy, but very relatable. Anyone can
at any
relate
age,
to that.
right? So.
Yeah. So it worked.
It did work. And so, yeah, it's like, as I was reading Salt Magic, it's like, oh, this is like growing up and coming to terms with that. But then I'm reading the Contradictions, and this line will not get out of my head. Is anyone ever really happy again once they realize how messed up the world is? And that's like it's like such a living in 2022 feeling. And probably when you were experiencing it, or Sophie was experiencing it at the time, right? And so I guess this is an autofiction kind of title that is from past experiences, and I think you've talked in the past about how you needed to sit with this story before you were ready to tell it. So what? I guess my question is, why now? Like.
Yeah, well, I think why now really was just that finally I had enough distance from like the parts of my life that it's based off of. But yeah, I think it sort of coincided with some of the ideas that the characters are talking about becoming somewhat more mainstreamed. Like when I was having these conversations about Marxism, it was much more fringe than I would say it is today. And that is really just coincidental, I think. But I think it did make it feel more like, oh, I can put this out and more people will kind of understand some of what the characters are talking about. But yeah, I think the biggest thing was just it feeling emotionally too close. And eventually, I didn't have that self-compassion that I was talking about earlier until enough time had passed that I could see that some of the situations were humorous and absurd and, yeah.
Very similarly, yours is based on your own experience and that of your kids. Did you need some of that distance before you were ready to share some of this, or?
Not so much the distance, because it wasn't painful, and also if I waited for stuff to stop happening to me, I would never do a book, because like every day I'm Jordan Banks, like something happens, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, like being on the airplane and the guy's like cutting in front of me, I'm like, no, I'm here. It's like, oh well, I didn't think you were on first class. They're like, and why? And then he said it multiple times, and it's like, okay, wow. Yeah. So yeah. So like that's just like, what my life is. The reason why I did it when I could is the first time that I was allowed to do it. Because again, I think even in publishing, like it's weird that, and I appreciate anyone that said that New Kid was groundbreaking, but in 2020, like just a black kid going to private school really shouldn't have been that big a deal. But I self-published for like 20 years because I couldn't get traditionally published. So it's more the fact that someone is allowing me to finally tell my story, but I've always been willing to tell it.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that it's interesting to watch people be surprised to hear that you've been cartooning so long, and it's like no one was just paying attention before. It just, the change in the publishing scene it's still too slow, but it's happening, I think. Jose, you write a little in the afterword of the book about some of these decisions to write this story in English versus in Spanish, and some of the language choices. And I was wondering if you would share some of that thought process about putting the story out there in English, and it is almost entirely in English. There's a little bit of Spanish that shows up, but why so heavily English instead of mixing it up?
I mean, I think about that, someday I swear that I'll have like a good, quick answer about that, to be honest. But no, and I'm not trying to be like, but it's something that I think about a lot, because as someone who grew up in Mexico, just speaking Spanish is my first language. But also, again, living at the border, English just overflows so much and so easily. So I spend way too much time thinking about language and how that affects our day-to-day and how that affects what we're influenced by and what have you. So taking all that into consideration when working on Twin Cities, I had to, I had to make a very specific decision. And one of the questions that I was grappling, that it still kind of shakes me a bit to this day, to be honest, is if this story is taking place predominantly on the Mexican side, why am I writing it in English? And the honest answer is because, well, that's where my publisher is, and that's because I live in the U.S. at the moment, so that means that my market, I guess, or my audience for the most part is on this side. So, it does kind of take a bit of my sleep at night, to be honest, but it's also one that it's the circumstance. So I try to make up for it by having signage, or having every once in a while there's some phrases here and there or something, but yeah, it's not enough, but it is what it is. So yeah, it's a big one.
Yeah. And I don't expect you to have an easy answer. There is no easy answer to that, right? And I don't think you're not doing enough, right? You're doing what you can in the circumstances that you're in, right? I am curious though, will you be releasing a Spanish language version?
If anybody wants to buy the rights,
Okay.
by all means, hit me. Not my phone number's not good. No, but it's my therapist says the same thing. So.
And so, Hope and Rebecca, how did we wind up in World War I with this story?
Well, we both love historical.
Yes.
And our two previous books together were also historical fiction. Those were set in the 1860s, and they were sort of piratey, swashbuckling books.
Yes.
And
high seas adventure.
yeah, I think part of it is that I'm such a big fan of Gasoline Alley.
Yes,
which,
that's right.
Yeah.
That was a starting point.
Yeah, which I read years ago and was just so blown away by how modern it felt still.
Gasoline Alley is a comic strip from the 1910s started?
It started in, 19...
But it went to the 30s?
something. I think it might still be going.
Oh, well.
But
yeah.
It's really terrific, and it's very slice of lifey, and I love that it gave me this feeling that people were people then, just the way they are now. It's just the language changes and the clothes change, but people are always people. And I think that's really what I love so much about historical, is it lets you project yourself back in time and think, people were not so different from us back then. What about you, Rebecca?
As far as period stories, I've always felt that they give you a chance to put yourself or experience emotions or experience a story and yet have some distance from reality, from your everyday. So when you do experience things in a historical story that relate to your everyday life in the present moment, you don't have to have that same visceral connection to them, and you can kind of let yourself feel however you want to feel about a character who reminds you of yourself but who is from the 1800s. It's like an anachronistic connection, or if you feel a little bit out of place in modern day, you might find yourself connected more to another time or indeed another universe or the future, which I think is part of why a lot of us are here, that we have that feeling. For me, it's definitely that I love that. It allows me to not have to sort of be stuck in my myself in reality in modern day.
Yeah, and I think another thing is that a lot of our books have this subtext of like gender and grappling with gender and gender roles.
Yes,
And
that's right.
it feels almost easier to tackle it through historical fiction
Yes.
because the roles were much more crystallized back then. Like now there's this illusion of you can do whatever you want, you can be whoever you want, and that's not really true, but
Well,
more true than it was then.
yes. It's an open question
Yeah.
still, the way that it was then. Nothing's
Yeah.
really changed.
Yeah.
It's an ongoing conversation.
Hey, Hope, one of the interesting things about Gaston Alley is one of the few comic strips where the characters aged.
Yes, that is
And
it's
that,
so cool.
that,
You're
that
right.
freaked me out as a kid. Because Charlie Brown is always going to be like 10 years old, and 200 years he'll still be 10 years old.
Yeah.
But to see those characters age over time.
In real time. It's
Yeah.
so cool.
Yeah, it was
That's a good
about
point.
it was about a child growing up, you know, from a baby all the way up through their life.
But I mean, your characters are growing up too.
Dun, dun, dun.
Well, you know, it's kind of weird. So in New Kid, it was the entire 7th grade, because I thought that would be the only chance I had in the book. Like, I didn't expect to, I just didn't know what to expect. So they did their whole 7th grade. And then in Class Act, it's 8th grade. And then they went another book. I said, well, but they didn't want them to ever get 9th grade.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, so now I kind of painted myself into a hole. Like, how do I stop time?
That's the danger of middle grade.
So in the next book, School Trip, it's from April of 8th grade until June. And then supposedly they don't want anymore. I'm like done with that. But if they were to say, oh, we want another one, and they don't want them in 9th grade, then I just have to like have this weird like, Into the Spider-Verse thing where time just doesn't affect
You can
them
always
at all.
reset the universe, right?
You're right,
We've learned
exactly.
anything.
I'm going to be watching how you tackle this because this same question comes up for me too all the time.
Right, because originally when I pitched New Kid, when I was thinking of, because I went to Fieldston in Riverdale, and I went 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade, and the one thing that Harper fought me on, they were like, well, we never want to see him as a senior. And someone in 5th grade wouldn't necessarily want to read about an 11th grader, but make him in 7th grade. And I'm glad that they did, but originally I was going to do that, but I would not want to do Jordan Banks as a senior in high school either. So if I ever do another book, I have to contain it to this is 2 weeks while they're going out for a play or something like that, and just never refer to what grade they're in again. So I may call you for for advice.
Again, the tension is so high because
Right, exactly.
Make sure they go to the.
I mean, you could even do it on a single day now, right? We're getting these long stream of consciousness books where it's one day.
Right.
But I
Remember
don't think I've
24,
Oh, yeah.
TV show 24 is the whole season was just one day, so I'd have to do something like that.
Just like that.
Yeah, you can do Ulysses.
There's lots of sitcoms that take place.
This is a great example.
Bottle episode.
Yeah, bottle episode. Classic.
Okay, so completely switching gears a little bit. So we have a very wide range of artistic styles on this panel, and so naturally I'm curious about process a little bit, right? So, Sophie, yours is very clean lines and empty space, and it kind of forces you to that windowing part of comics. You have no choice but to put yourself in that space. So how do you approach creating that kind of not empty panels, but simpler, cleaner panels?
Yeah, I really like European comics in general, a lot of French and Italian artists, but Christophe Blaine is somebody who just does a really good job of drawing this beautiful, elaborate background, and then it's just okay, you know where you are, let's drop it out, and then we get to just experience the rhythm of the conversation and not have all this stuff in the background that's sort of distracting you. And I feel like in some ways that's more like having an actual conversation because you're not taking in the architecture as you're engaging with a person. Partially it's easier to not draw the background all the time, but I do think that it is really in service of the story and the experience. And Yeah, so that's, the European comics is a lot of where I get that sort of impulse.
Great. And Jose, I'm very curious about this this duality, right? We've got twins, obviously, and there's two characters here, but you have a lot of these pages where they're overlapping, and was it hard to get the pagination right, to see these splash pages where on one side is one character, the other? Like, I'm just imagining this, like, oh, I have to drop 4 pages to make this work correctly kind of conversations.
Yeah, when I had the epiphany to do that, it was the first time that I explained it to my editor, she was like, I don't think I understand it, but I think I need to see it. And yeah, I mean, like, it's something that became also like a part of the design of the book, and why I was very excited to do it specifically as a physical copy, because, you know, if you're reading it, you can actually just be going. And a little throwback to what I was saying about earlier, when writing this, I wanted to be fair. Yeah, I thought that it was very important to keep this story as fair as possible. I mean, ideally to all characters, but specifically to the main characters. Like, I wanted to be fair in terms of what are the appeals of staying in your hometown where everything's familiar versus what are the appeals of wanting to go away in order to develop and grow. And, you know, like I know that it sounds like I'm conflating, but yeah, like, it's when designing and thumbnailing and all that, yeah, it's something that I was constantly very conscious and wanted to make. Well, I wanted to match panels to panels, and I wanted to match, like, the color choices and what have you, so they could be, like, you know, so they can play off of each other. And yes, whenever I would receive an editorial note such as, oh, this may need another page, I would say, well, no, it needs 2, because those things need to be even out. Like, if you put a page in between 53 and 54, like, well, yeah, but we need another one, so that way those spreads stay the same, so, like, or they split together. So, like, yeah, it definitely gave me an opportunity to be very playful. So,
have you seen how that turns out in ebook form yet?
Actually, yes,
Okay.
because, you know, like, when I was being sent, like, proofs and, like, any editorial stuff, like, yeah, I did get to see it, but, I mean, I guess there is something about, like, looking at it on a PDF and just, you know, like, looking at one page at a time, like, there's something of the pacing that I guess doesn't entirely translate well, but, I mean, I guess, I don't know, I hope it's okay, so it's, I liked it.
And so you mentioned color, and of all of the books here, the one that is popping me with color the most is Salt Magic. And I'm really curious about how you decided the color palette choices and the various, like, each, yeah, it's amazing. So how did that decision-making process go?
For this book, I did something a little different than I had done with previous books. All of them I'm proud of. I love that every single page of this I am so proud of. I shrunk every page down to thumbnail size, and I put them all in one document. So it's just a giant Photoshop document where you can see every single page. And I did a little color thumbnail for each page so that I could kind of color them all at once. And I could think about each scene and think about the color themes for each scene. And even when I was putting in more detail in the full version, it would always be tied to that thumbnail and tied to that color theme and that color story. And so that allowed me to drop out color in certain panels where I wanted to emphasize a feeling or emotion or an action moment. So a panel will become all yellow in a climactic moment. And actually, you mentioned Christoph Blaine, who does this as well, and that color style is a big influence on how I think about color in comics. And he'll have, like, whole panels that are just red when something dangerous is happening, or a lot of, like, high sea comics, like ocean-faring comics, and everything will be green at night, it just evokes so much emotion. And that's what I really wanted to convey in the book, was all of the emotions of each scene.
Yeah, it has, like, a very Wizard of Oz sort of vibe, the coloring. I always think about that with this book, where you're passing out of the real world and going into Fantasyland a little bit, and the color reflects that. Yeah,
the inner world of the characters is conveyed through the color, or at least I hope.
It is, for sure. Yeah.
It definitely does come through. And I love that Wizard of Oz comparison, especially thinking about the timelines of when this story is taking place, right? But so Jerry, I have it's a non-artistic question for you. So my whole thing is thinking about like comics as a medical and graphic medicine kind of stuff. And in Class Act, we have Alexandra's puppet as Dr. Pigman Freud, which I thought was hilarious, but also really that scene is very like powerful and moving where, you know, Drew's kind of almost getting a hallway therapy session. And I'm curious how did that scene come about? Did you do a lot of digging and research into that, or was that just your own background and understanding, or both?
Yeah, the reason why I came up with the character Alexandra with her sock puppets is because, you know, when I realized that I was doing a book talking about race and class, I knew that I had to lighten it up because I would never want it to be a book that was banned and, you know, but that didn't really work out. That didn't work out anyway. Yeah, but anyway, that's beside the point. But I wanted to add some stuff that was just plain silly, right? But then once I did the character, I felt bad that the other characters were teasing her, you know? So then I felt compelled to give her this whole backstory, and then over time, she ends up becoming the one that everyone tells their problems to, you know? So she's, you know, kind of the most together person of all of it, because they're like, wow, you know, you really aren't afraid to be you. Like, you know that people are teasing you and you have the side puppet and you're okay with that. And so I wanted to show that the one that everyone thought was kind of shy girl was actually the most together, you know? So when I did that therapy session, you know, you take Drew, who is the one that everyone thinks just, you know, is very focused, and that, who does he let it all out to? And he lets it out to the one that everyone thinks is like the weird puppet girl, you know? And then just to put humor, and then even to overdo it, so I will tell one artistic thing is, again, most of the books that I see with African-American characters, especially picture books, are photorealistic. You know, it's like a Kadir Nelson, a Brian Collier, Eric Velasquez, which is amazing, but you don't see a lot of like fun, silly stuff. So when I created the look of this, I wanted to also break the laws of physics, almost like Warner Brothers. So eyes can pop out, or Alexandra in New Kid is so happy to be walking with them that her feet are floating, like she's never touching the ground. I just wanted to have some silly stuff in, just, you know, for the whole balance to it.
Yeah, definitely. And there's a line in there from Alexandra that stuck with me, like the one from Contradictions, where it's like, what good is being liked if you don't like yourself? Like, if you can't like your own person. And like, that's one of those things where it's like, oh, I wish every middle schooler had that growing up, because that's something that you need to hear. Yeah, so we have a few minutes left. I think that said 5. But so I wanted to see if the audience had any questions for our panelists. Sure. So the gist of the question was if you can share what kind of the target age range for your book is, and then maybe a question for you all individually after about like trying to incorporate comics into another book.
I'll just start. Salt Magic is middle grade, so middle school. And if you're talking about trying to use samples of the book, I'm sure that would be no problem to just reach out to the publisher and get a clearance. Yeah.
Yep, middle grade 8 to 12?
I think I usually say like 9 to 12.
9 to 12. Yeah, I don't know
Depends
what
on the
grade
kid,
levels
really.
those are.
Yeah.
And yes, you definitely should incorporate more comics into your curriculum. Everyone should.
The Contradictions is, sort of YA plus. The characters are in college, so.
For Twin Cities, like they're they graduated 6th grade going into 7th grade, so I think that I think the age grade is appropriately middle grade specifically. So yeah, it's we all like to say all ages, right? So everyone can like it, but yeah, I think that's the target is more around that 12, 13, not the best years of your life, but it'll be okay.
My goal was like when I used to take my kids to see Shrek, and they'd be laughing hysterically at some parts, and I'd be laughing hysterically as an adult at other parts. So like the sweet spot, I guess, is 7, 8, 9, 10, like but then, like you said, hopefully, you liked it, didn't you, Matthew?
I loved all of these books, and so yeah. I was gonna put my librarian hat on,
Nice.
and say like age suggestions is a good
There
way
you
to
go.
think like, and especially for contradictions, like I would absolutely give that to high schoolers. But I do know there are some people who would be like, oh, hold on, we can't do that. Because then they'll think that, oh, now the kid's going to go like hitchhiking and it's going to end poorly. It's like, no, it's not necessarily an endorsement of that activity. It's relatable to that group, right? Yeah, so I think there was another hand over here. Yes. So the question was thinking about the audience that you're writing these books for, moving a little away from this this false reality of a normal cis white straight male kind of person as a reader, and but do you keep which readers are you really keeping in mind as you write these stories? We'll start down here with you this time, Jerry.
So what was important to me is that I grew up seeing, the Brady Bunch, I'm Greg Brady, I'm, Danny Partridge, that kind of thing. But rarely do you ever see white kids emulating black characters, like in literature, where it's like, my kids were like, okay, they're Greg Heffley and they're, Percy Jackson and they're Harry Potter, but almost never do you see a white kid saying, oh, I'm, And so I wanted to do characters that obviously black kids could see themselves, but then the white kids could be like, oh, hey, that's a cool kid. I like that. And to me, it wasn't until Into the Spider-Verse where I saw that for the first time. I mean, I felt like I was 10 years old, but then you have white kids for the first time wanting to be Black Panther or Into the Spider-Verse. And I think that when you grow up like that and we're not always seen as the enemy, you don't go and do some of the terrible things that people go and do. So I think that it's a really massive impact.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's, sounds kind of obvious to this room, but there's a lot of power for readers to understand that what they're going through is normal, acceptable, and relatable, which is also why it's important that when they see themselves, both in fiction or nonfiction stuff, it resonates and it's meaningful that way. So, it's because someone is telling them, you do exist. So that's palpable, I guess. So,
Yeah, I think with the contradictions, one of the things would be, it's a queer story, but so much, even though we have this blossoming of queer representation, so much of it is queer romance specifically, and I really partially wanted to see queer characters that are not specifically in the story arc is not about a romance. So as far as and I think if it's a good story, hopefully anybody can enjoy it, but the people who have experienced it are, I guess, more my primary the people that I'm keeping in mind as I'm actually writing it. I'm keeping in mind myself and my friends, and so the hope is that other people will enjoy it too. But yeah.
Do you want to take this first, or?
I think that you should think about the specific audience that you are writing the book for, rather than try to make it universal to quote unquote everyone to enjoy. There's a lot of that already, and there is not enough literature that is made for marginalized groups. And so we are moving towards that, but we can move faster and farther and harder. So I'm excited to see more books that are targeted.
Well, this is always a tricky thing as the cis white lady on the panel. I think about it a lot. I feel like I'm certainly not intentionally writing for merely cis white girls. But that is my perspective, because that's who I am. I think mostly I just try not to be super othering in my work. And
there's a question of showing
tricky.
what's correct and what's incorrect, and when you see only white stories, that you assume that that's the right way to go. But it's an open question. It's about a conversation. So it's nice to have a panel about this topic.
Absolutely. I was given the wrap it up sign, but so very quickly, in like 15 seconds, can you all tell people where they can find you, both here and elsewhere? We'll start with Hope.
You can find me on Twitter @HopeLarson. I'm on Instagram @DespairLarson. Not @HopeLarson on Instagram. Someone else has that name.
I'm on Instagram and Twitter as @RebeccaMock, and so you can find me there.
Yeah, at Comic-Con, I'm signing at the Prism booth and at the Silver Sprocket booth at various times. And online, the best place is just sophieyanow.com. I have a newsletter. I have social media, but newsletter's better.
I spend way too much time on Twitter, but you can find me at @JOEPI, and I'm on Instagram, where every once in a while I post some stuff of what I'm working on, which is that's THEJOEPI. And here at the con, I don't know, I'll be walking the floor, so it's, yeah.
Everything on social media is just Jerry Craft, and in a couple minutes you'll be able to find me just right over there by that chair.
We're also going to be moving over to the autograph area after this.
Yeah.
Rebecca and I and Jerry. Is everybody else going as well?
I think this whole
sign.
panel
Yeah,
is
are we
going.
signing?
Okay.
I'm not.
Don't spend as much time on Twitter as we do. It's not a good place.
Yeah,
But
it's
yeah, so
going
thank.
at all cost.
It has a cost. Thank you all for being here with us today. Can we have a round of applause for the creators? Yeah. And thank you all for being here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.